I relinquish my concerns to the serenity of spirit within. If I feel stressed or rushed, I might seem out of alignment, off-center from my source. Yet this is the furthest thing from the truth. Either I'm failing to see the good that is present, or I'm allowing myself to become distracted from my spiritual purpose. Faith provides the answer. The realization that within me are love, creativity, strength, and understanding. Gifts that are with me always. I'm blessed with an inner knowing that leads me to my answers. My next steps become clear. I align with my divine essence as I pause, breathe, and appreciate the life I've been given and the abilities I have to do what I need to do. I relinquish my concerns to the serenity of spirit within. And from Romans, we know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. And so it is. Let's take these thoughts into the silence.
Let's pray. Almighty Spirit of God, we recognize, acknowledge today that you simply are the only presence and power and are only good. We know that your spirit is the spirit of truth, and it's the spirit of goodness, and it's the spirit of freedom that all of us can experience if we choose. And we just welcome your spirit of truth here in this series of book studies. Show us what piece we may be missing and not experiencing in our lives so that we can reach fulfillment of freedom, of the love and the joy and the peace that is ours to have. And in this moment we say yes to life and to love and your power and your wisdom and intelligence flowing through each and every one of us. In this moment of stillness and silence, we feel it and say yes. so it is. Amen. Namaste. Wendy, I'm hearing is it me or am I hearing a rattle going on here? Is it too loud? Thank you. So as I said earlier, 30 years ago, I was just becoming a member at Unity in Wilmington, North Carolina on the beach. And this was all new to me. I had grown up in a very fundamental Mennonite religion that was very fundamental, and a very much of a judgmental God that was going to zap me, and my name was in the little black book a lot. So I figured I might as well, if I'm going to be bad, I might be real bad. Just take my chances, But I can remember when I read this book for the first time, it was like my soul just opened. And it was like truth. This is what I've been waiting for. This is what I knew somewhere deep in me. I had no idea what it was. I couldn't figure it all out. Some of the words didn't make sense, but it was like I knew inside of me something triggered in me 30 years ago. And what was so different, and maybe again, I'm probably different than all of you, but then it was like, well, I got to go find the next book and the next book and the next book. And I spent 20 years finding the next book, right? I wanted to get it intellectually. And I was turned off by Dr. Emily Cady's use of the King James Version at that time, and also her languaging. And I was like, yeah, that's just really old stuff. And I had to find the new stuff, right? And a lot of the new stuff was a takeoff on the old stuff, You ever notice? Only one truth, just many voices. But about 8-10 years ago, I went back to the book, and I've gone now many, many times through it, and I'm so excited because going into the sabbatical, Jacqueline and I got brand new books. Mine had so many underlines, it was just ink. But in that process, it was so interesting to go through it from where I was today in my consciousness today versus 30 years ago. And that's what I would ask you to open up to for yourselves. Because many of you have been around Unity, have read this way back when. But go at it today from a different place. Go at it where you are in consciousness. And part of what I'm going to try to do is take the King James Version part of the Bible piece out of it and do some metaphysical understanding of it so we don't get bogged down in some of all that. Why else do I think it's important? When I look around at all the great coaches, it doesn't matter, basketball, John Wooden, or Belichick, as much as I can't stand it, the New England Patriot. All the great coaches, whether they're teaching the orchestra, or they're teaching language, or they're teaching sports, what do the great coaches always do? Belichick doesn't care if you make $6 million a year and you have 10 years in the league. You're going to start out the new year learning basics again. How do you tackle? How do you block? How do you throw? How do you catch? And the great ones who teach music do the same. And no matter where you are, you look at the great coaches, they will always take, no matter who it is, back to basics. And that's what I'm looking at as we go through this process in this year. I don't know about you, but I still get excited about September. Y'all, it feels like a new year to me, right? I guess that's all that programming from school, and it was like September hit, it was like, yeah. Except probably for you all teachers are like, well, I can't wait for the snow day. That's where I see we are. I also see that in our community, and I see that in our world. A time of reset. And when you reset, you go back to basics. And so what I'm going to do in this process is try to take 4 to 6 nuggets out of every chapter. Not get bogged down in all the words, but more or less, I'm going to ask you to compare yourself where you are against these principles that she's holding us to. And I think if we do that from a more broad standpoint, we can get more out of these 12 lessons. Because they truly are the gold standard. They are what Unity uses, it's what divine science uses, it's what science of the mind uses. And we're going to talk about why in a second. But this was a very interesting lady. Her whole life, up until she began to write, she was known with the H in her word, in her name, Harriet, Katie. They call her Hattie, Katie. And only when she began to write did she drop that and move to Emily, so that no one could trace back to her family and create any kinds of problems. This is a woman who kept absolutely out of the limelight. And you can see she lived a very long life, 1848 to 1941. This is a woman who grew up when women could only be school teachers and could not vote and could not own land. And when they got married, they had to quit their job to make room for the man to have a job. That was the world she grew up in, and she lived in this tiny little town south of Syracuse, New York. But this woman was connected to the divine in a way, and when I think back, trying to put in context to who she was and what she lived in, she taught in a one-room schoolhouse, 15 miles south of Syracuse. That was her first job. Why? Because that was the only acceptable job for a woman, right? And at 38 years old, now I had 38 to 48 or so, about 1861, she decided she's going to be a doctor. Now, there were no women doctors. And she went to New York City. Now, she stands almost 6 foot tall. Now, 1860, everybody was shorter than we are today. Men weren't 6 feet tall. So she stood head above the men. And she had the audacity to become a doctor in New York City. One of the first in the country. And as we look at her writings that came out of this incredible pioneer, not only educationally, but then into physical, medical doctor, but then into a spiritual healer like no one had seen in New York City. A.B. Simpson was her first teacher, mentor. He was from Canada. He was a Pentecostal revivalist who came to Manhattan, New York, set up a big old revival tent, and started laying hands on people, and they got healed. They were dropping crutches and walking for the first time ever. And these amazing things were happening. She was so taken. At this point in time, she was a medical doctor. She's like, I'm working with these people for months, and they're not getting healed, and this guy's laying hands, and that changed the whole course of her life. And she went on, and later on, when we've studied her other mentor, Emma Curtis Hopkins, who came out of Chicago and came to New York to teach, and she became a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins. So that's kind of how her life went. School teacher to a medical doctor to becoming, I believe, one of the most powerful writers of New Thought. We're going to take a look at her books. Here's what's interesting. Most people never get past Lessons in Truth. That's the one Unity has made famous. That's one everybody kind of is drawn to. But look at her first book, was God a Present Help, was written in 1868, 30 years before Lessons in Truth, when she had become a medical doctor and had first been introduced to some of the spiritual thinking. And she wrote this first amazing book. Now, in all of the books that we have, it's the last book. And I didn't want to change everything around and get so confusing to do that. But we're going to study God as a Present Help because there's some nuggets in there that are so powerful. Most people never get to the end of the book. And we're going to get there. Then she did Lessons in Truth. You can see 1896. And then about 20-some years later, she wrote How I Use Truth. And a lot of people miss this because these are writings out of her journey where she was struggling with the truth and why it didn't work, and if I change this, look what happened. That's what this whole second book is about. And I find so many nuggets of gems in there that help all of us because it's the same thing you and I are going through in 2020. One truth, one challenge, and it all fits. But, so Myrtle, as you know, I give Myrtle most of the credit for Unity anyway. Myrtle reads this pamphlet that she wrote and went to Charles and said, "This is the best writing on Emma Curtis Hopkins' work that I've ever read." And he goes, "Oh my gosh, yes it is. We have to get her in here and make her part of Unity." And she's like, "No, I'm not coming. No, I'm not leaving New York." All those years, she never, ever went to the village. They tried to make her keynote speakers and do all that. She said, "No, you got to understand, it's not about my personality. It's about the divine information that's coming through me." Well, Charles, as Charles was, he decided he knew how to make her little brochure a little better. Not a good thing. She let him have it in a letter that's amazing. I mean, she grabbed Charles by the short hairs and said, "Don't you ever touch my divine children again, or you will never get another writing." Well, back then, nobody talked to Charles like that. So from then on, Unity published exactly how Dr. Emily Cady sent it. And so you can see lesson number 1 was in the Unity magazine in 1891, 5 years before it became a book. So the lessons began to show up. Actually, it wasn't even Unity magazine at the time, it was called Thought. That was the precursor to Unity magazine. And Charles recognized how powerful these teachings were that he told Myrtle, he said, "We're never going to try to do anything better. This is like direct line from God. Don't touch it." And Unity never changed that. It has always been the basis, these 12 lessons of Lessons in Truth. But here's one of the challenges. I talked a little bit about it. She uses King James Version, which turned me off way back when. And it turns a lot of people off. Because, you know, the King James Version is not easy sometimes unless you read it a lot and are able to skip over some of the ye's and the thou's and all that kind of stuff. The other thing is she writes kind of in the Victorian language of the time. And again, that gets some people turned off in the process. But behind all that is these nuggets of spiritual truth. And what we're going to work to do over these next couple of weeks on Sundays and Tuesdays is really strip away all that stuff that's just signpost and get down to the meat of the matter. What are the 4 or 5 principles in each one of these lessons that if you and I continue to implement in our lives will change? Now, one of the things that's not talked about a lot, she had her practice, medical practice, till 5 o'clock. And after 5 o'clock to whenever was her spiritual practice. And people came in droves for spiritual healing from all over the country. And she would never be interviewed. She would never allow it to be photographed. Even when a Unity minister in Syracuse went to visit her grave, he found out her grave was back south of Syracuse and found her niece. And he had a picture taken of his niece and himself next to Dr. Cady's tombstone. He immediately got a letter from her when he went back and said, "Never publish that photograph. We don't want people from all over the country, the world, coming to her graveside." And he honored that. We've never seen that photo that minister had taken. That's how powerful she was in that it wasn't about her. It was about what was coming through her, and she would never let her personality be. Only once did Charles and Myrtle ever meet her. And that was near the end of Myrtle's life. They made a trip to New York and spent a couple hours with her in her home. But up until that, all those years that she was published in all these books, never ever. The other thing I'm so taken with her, she's the only second spiritual teacher that I know that actually lived God is my source, substance, and supply. At some point in her career, she said, "You know what, I absolutely believe that, but I'm not living it. I'm not going to bill any more patients." And she began to work for free. And at the end of 2 years, she was almost starving. She said, and her writing says, I was faint with no food. And she cried out to God and said, why are you failing me? I did everything you said. I'm doing all these things, and I'm about to basically check out. And she got and we're going to talk about this in the prosperity piece of it, she got a direction from God. Immediately, supplies started coming, and they said she died. When she died, she was a very, very wealthy woman. But she lived this, and she said, okay, I'm not going to bill again. I totally trust and believe that God is my source. And she went through almost a 2-year period of being challenged that she was failing. And she didn't fail. She won in a great big way. Here's her advice for you and I. For a time, if you're going to study this, let go of your past beliefs. Take this into your core so you're not trying to put new wine in the old. You've all heard that here many times. And it's the same thing I say to you. Pick up what works for you. If you don't, put it down. Because all of us are at a different place in consciousness. We can't cookie cutter this and say, well, right now you need lesson 1. Doesn't work that way. And that's what she's saying. But she said, if you can get to just take everything that's limiting and lack, set it aside, and at the end, if it is not true for you, then go back to the way you were. And that's the very beginning of this book, and I think it's so important because she's saying to you, it's okay if it's not for you where you are today. And I was so drawn to that in the very beginning. I was like, I had seen so many spiritual leaders and read so many books where it's like, my way's the right way. She's like so humble with this. It's like, no, if it doesn't fit, let it be. But take your limiting beliefs right now and just set them aside for 12 lessons. That's all she asked. And she said, as you go through the lessons, you will begin to get answers that you have in lesson 1, 2, and 3. And that's what happened for me, because in the beginning, I couldn't figure out the language. And, my definition of God was completely different than what she was presenting. And that created a bunch of dissonance for me as I went through. So let's take lesson number 1. Bondage or Liberty Which? It's the title. And she uses a story, and we all know in the Old Testament, about the Israelites who are in slavery in Egypt. They've been there a long, long time. As she approaches the Bible, and as I do, I believe these stories are about our consciousness, not about the historical story of whatever. And the Israelites stand for your consciousness. And the question she's asking in lesson 1 is, what is your Egypt? Is it sickness? Is it lack? Is it unhappiness? Is it sadness? Is it darkness of ignorance? We all have some Egypt in us. And she's saying being willing to take a look at what that is, because until you do, and you can identify what it is, you can't begin the process to become free. You will hear this theme of spiritual, mental, and emotional and physical freedom over and over and over again. Because she believes, as I do, that that was exactly what the teachings of Jesus was. Showing us a path, showing us a way to freedom. But we have to identify what is holding us back. What is our Egypt? And that's one of the most profound questions that she asked here in lesson 1. And the easy answer is, I don't have any. Oh, yes, you do. We all do. And what she's saying here, put that all aside and go deep. What is something in your life that's holding you back from having the fulfillment and freedom at whatever level that you want to have? And these lessons will take you step by step. And I believe for you, and one of the things we're going to talk about on Tuesday night, is really do identify one of these. And it doesn't have to be big, small, whatever, just one. Because as we begin to focus on one, as we go through these 12 lessons, we get the process that she teaches, which is the process that I believe in her interpretation of the process to freedom that Jesus taught. What's on the other side of that, and when you identify as the land of milk and honey, the promised land. But if you remember the story, there was some time spent in the desert. Not a lot of fun in the desert without food and water. Part of the process. If we recognize it, sometimes we call it in our spiritual journey the valley. It's not always just milk and honey. We go through the process. And that's what she's teaching here in these lessons of, number one, identifying where you are in the process and identifying where you want to go to the next level of milk and honey or the promised land. Because one of the things I know about the divine, about God, is it's expansive. The universe right now, the scientists say, is expanding more than 12% a year in every direction. Have you expanded 12% from your consciousness a year ago at Labor Day? If you haven't, you're going backwards. Right? If you've only expanded 8% and the universe has gone 12, you fell back 4. So the question is, what in you is your Egypt that's holding you back from expansion to 12% or more? Because there is no limit in God, except you and I put the limit on. What would you need to do to expand 15% a year over this next year till next Labor Day? That's the key question we all face. She goes on to say, these are the things to think about. These are the things to take you out of your Egypt, whatever it might be, and move you towards the milk and honey in the promised land. Is it true? Is it noble? Is it right? We shortcut that with these three. Is it true? Is it good? Is it beautiful? And if it is, it's probably going to take you to the milk and honey. If it's not, it's going to take you a different direction. And that's the expansion that the universe is going through, and that I believe you and I are called to at every level of our lives, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And when we're in harmony and we're in balance, we're growing, all of us are growing at that level. And she's suggesting that we begin to look at what we think about and what we talk about. She said it must have this experience like the prodigal son. You all know that story, right? Spent his inheritance, lived up the great life, he thought, and ended up eating the husk with the pigs. You know, that story has a special meaning because for a Jewish man, you know what they think about pigs, to end up that low in life that he was having corn husk, not even the corn. He only had the husk with the pigs. That's as low as you can go. That's what is being exemplified here in this story. And from that point, what says is, and what Dr. Katie's saying here is, we must come to our true self. The Bible says he came to himself. And what she's saying here is, no, it's your true self. It's not your ego, it's not your personality, it's not your intellect. It's that true self within you, which is the divine. We have to come to that, and when we do, we create desire. Without desire, we will never change. We have to have a desire to move 12% next year, or we stay exactly the same or go backwards. And it's out of this, you know, we've heard it in so many other programs that you have to hit rock bottom, right? Before you can make some change. That's not a true statement. You can make the change today if you want. But you must have that desire to come to your true self and begin to do the things that lesson 1 takes us into. And finally, this piece is so important out of James. Be doers of the word, not hearers of the word. We have way too much, this is an Eric Butterworth quote. In unity, we have too much hearing and talking, not enough doing. We can hear it, we can say it, we can do the quotes, we can do affirmations, but we don't do the truth. And what Dr. Katie's saying here is we have to begin to do the process. Or otherwise you're going to be here next Labor Day, falling another 12% or more behind. So let's look at key point, lesson number 1. Each of us believe to some extent our suffering is caused by our bodies or what happens externally. Anybody here but me believes that along the way. That's called the victim mentality, right? It happens to me because of what this person did, or what the political system did, or what the economic system did, or what my parents did, or what my ex did. We all have pieces of this and all of this, and what she's saying is, look for those pieces. That's your Egypt. Where are you still holding on to? I'm suffering because of something external to me. These are very, very deep questions because you can't answer them superficially. The only way I know to do it is get out a piece of paper and a pen and start asking questions of myself. Looking for my Egypt. Because it's there. And if you're saying to yourself, I have no Egypt, I want you to go home and I want you to look in the mirror. Look in your eyes and tell yourself you have no Egypt. We all do. I suspect that when we no longer have any Egypts, we probably won't be on this planet. We'll take off to whatever is next. What's your Egypt? Number 2, all joy, strength, and good comes from inside. When we know this, nothing from the outside can ever take it away. Nothing. And if it's being taken away, then we've got to go back to 1 and find Egypt and begin to release that so we can live in a place where nothing can take it away. That's powerful stuff. 130 years ago, by a 6-foot woman doctor in New York. Number 3, daily meditation is the secret to power. We must take time every day to connect with the creative life force or God, whichever words you want to use. And when we don't, we pulled the plug from the power source. Am I the only one here who gets busy and forgets to do meditation some mornings? And we're disconnected from the source. And we're on our own. There is nothing, what I've decided in this 30 days, there's nothing more important than my time to connect with source. There's nothing. I'm fortunate because I get up a little bit earlier than my beloved Anilla, and I have some time that I can now set aside, and I never start my day without. And it changes completely. So find that time. It doesn't need to be 30 minutes. It can be 5 minutes. But you got to find a time, no matter what. I believe connect 2 times, morning and right before you go to sleep. Why? Because at night, we now know scientifically, whatever you last think stays with you for 4 hours. And if you're not thinking really good things, what happens? You don't get a whole lot of sleep. Right? So if you do those 2 times, you're going to see you're connected. That's where she says the power is to make these changes to go 12% a year. All human beings at first living in our physical, self-centered human nature will evolve step by step into the oneness with the divine. I love this because you're exactly where you're to be and you will never fail because we're all going to get there. Some may take 1,000 lifetimes. Some may do it in 10. But it doesn't matter because time is relative. What matters is we're all going to succeed. That's the journey. Going from where we are as human beings and wherever we are in consciousness to perfection and oneness with the divine. And everyone gets there, no matter what race, what culture, what religion, or when they live. Believing this and understanding this takes so much pressure off. It's like, okay, I'm where I'm supposed to be. What's the next step? Okay, tomorrow morning I need to meditate. That's all. Okay, I'm going to get there. Relax into the process. And finally, in lesson 1, when we are consciously being the truth, it radiates from us and does the work without our running around looking busy. I have 7 bookshelves in the office filled with books I read. That's busy. Way too busy. She says in lesson 4 or 5, if you want to shortcut your spiritual journey, stop reading books. This is about being versus doing. And all of us want to stay really, really busy, and we want to do everything that we can to make the next step in our spiritual journey. And she's saying, take a deep breath and relax and be connected with the divine and let that truth come through you and do the work. Completely different concept than what we were raised to do and be. Lesson number 2, statement of being, who and what God is and who or what we are. Jesus was talking to the Samaritan woman by the well, who was obviously asking questions on how to get into the kingdom of heaven. And he said, if you want to worship, I'm going to put the word experience here. If you want to experience God, you have to experience God in spirit and truth. No other way. Not in the physical. Physical is the effect. If you want to experience this, you've got to go back to cause. You've got to go back to source and be able to do that. So God is, and you're going to see this over and over again with Dr. Katie. She uses these 4. And I love them because I can remember them. Right? You ever see those lists, God is, and there's like 12 things, and I'm like, how am I going to memorize that? No, God is this, and this pretty well encompasses it for me. It's life, it's love, it's wisdom, and power. And when we begin to develop that and connect with that every day, this is what flows through us and begins to change what's happening in our experience and what's happening in our bodies. And it's exactly what she taught that brought the healing, spiritual healing, to all those people. Point number 1 in lesson 2. All things are one in the same spirit, manifested in different ways. This is the allness of God that Eric Butterworth taught. It's all. Everything. All. And once we begin to open our minds and that consciousness to be able to accept that allness, that's what begins then to flow through us. That's the fulfillment of the allness, with no lack, no limitation. Let's go to number 2. Some of these will cross over, as you see. The substance of God is a reality standing under everything. This word substance, people, at least I will say, I had a real hard time with. When I began to put things that came out of my Eastern training with Qigong and karate and whatnot, I put life force here, or chi, or ki, prana in India, it starts to make sense. It's that energy source underneath the physical. And you can't have anything in the physical until you first have it in spirit. That's going back to, if you want to experience God, you got to experience it in spirit and truth. You got to experience it in the substance, stands under the physical. And you're going to see substance show up again when we get to faith in next week. Because her understanding of faith is different than anyone else teaches. And I love it because it's so empowering. But this word substance, you really have to have an understanding of it. Because everything builds on this, because it's the connection of the substance that makes the change in the physical. Otherwise, it'll stay the same. And so when we look at God as our source, our substance, and then supply in the physical is the effect at the end. But this is true abundance, and prosperity has to start way back at cause. It's got to start with being in alignment with source, and then the substance comes through us, and then begins to develop in the physical and supply. Number 3, all the various forms of life are one life. The rocks, the plants, the birds, the creepy things, all humans, allness is all. And when we look at that is how we begin to move into this whole paradigm of oneness versus separation. This is where human consciousness is evolving to. It's taken way too long for me. I'd like them to hurry up. Get moving to oneness. But this is where we're all going to end up, are we not? If you believe what was in lesson 1, that all of us are on a spiritual journey and become one with the divine or one with source, we can only then all be one. So we're in that process. It's taken many more centuries than we hoped. But it's where we're headed. And that's where you can have hope. For no matter what's going on, the appearances we're seeing today in the world, in the country, or wherever, knowing that where we're all headed is to oneness. And oneness in the divine and in source. Number 4, all the intelligence and wisdom in the world are God as mind manifesting in different ways. There's one mind. God. You and I get to use it through us. Or we get to live, again, it's maybe just me, but I find I'm in my own little limited mind a lot. And I have to learn to let go of that, to let the flow of omniscience. All wisdom is available to you and I to live from. All wisdom never makes a mistake. Why wouldn't I want to be living from that? Because I forget. And I start doing it with my own. Well, I can figure this out. Right? Why? Because I forget. And my habits are to do that. And finally, in chapter 2 was about all love. Love that we experience on the human level, she says, is nothing but a drop of God's love. It's us trying to manifest God's love in the human. And we're going to see later on in her lessons is why. Why are you trying to make it human? Human love is always conditional. Right? This love is not. And as we move more and more into unconditional love, we don't have to try to love. Love flows to us, just as wisdom does and life does. And finally, in lesson 3, thinking. I love this out of James. It says, every great thing comes from the Father of light into us. And does not change like the ever-changing shadows. As we open up to this intelligence, this wisdom, this life, and this love, it's flowing through us, but here's where it has to go through. Right? This is where the limiters and lack come in. My thoughts. God isn't. God's all. There is but one mind in the universe coming through each of it, every one of us. One intelligence, one wisdom. Human mind, the intellect, makes mistakes. Why? Because it gathers information from the outside world through our senses. Not intuitively from the one mind that never makes a mistake. Ever. And so our choice all day long is which mind are we going to use? There's only one mind, but as it comes through I can use my intellect as I'm looking around and taking things. Jesus called it, do not judge the appearances. Do not judge what you see in the physical. Understand behind that is the substance of one life, of one power, of one wisdom. And as we begin to move to that understanding, we don't get caught as much anymore. We don't get entangled in that human stuff. It's like, okay, it's an appearance. Next, we can move on to find that truth, that oneness. Third one in lesson 3, universal or God mind sees and speaks from within only in absolute truth. It never wavers. It never changes. It's always absolute truth. And you and I can connect with that. Or we can live in relative truth, which is the human truth, just like love is conditional and unconditional. Truth is relative and absolute. And we can make the choice where we live from. Because remember what sets us free. Knowing truth. Not knowing relative truth. Knowing absolute truth. And as we connect with the absolute truth, that's what creates the freedom within each of us. Number 4, our way of thinking makes our happiness or unhappiness, our success or lack of success, and we can with effort change our way of thinking. Don't you just hate this? Who am I going to blame now? No one. You and I are 100% in control of the destiny of our lives. And it comes here. Are we going to open up to absolute truth and the divine one mind? Or are we going to limit and lack and go back to 12%? That's a choice you and I get to make every single day, every hour, every minute of the day. And I love this about Dr. Emily Cady. You know, I just can't stand it when you get these spiritual teachers that tell you this stuff and it's like, well, yeah, just do it. It's a piece of cake. She said it's with effort. You got to work at it. It doesn't just happen because you decide you're just going to make it happen, because you're up against all the habitual patterns and habits coming up out of your subconscious that have been there since at least this time on this planet, and maybe you brought some with you, I don't know. It's with effort. We have to work at this. We have to stay diligent. We have to watch our thoughts. We have to watch our words that we use that create the feelings, that create the energy that manifest in our life affairs. With effort. And finally, in lesson 3 is God at all times, regardless of what you and I do, our actions or non-actions. It has nothing to do with what you and I do. But I love this piece, is trying to pour more good into your life, to make you richer, happier, fuller, and more successful. Who would not say yes to that? And why isn't it happening? Because it's coming. All day long. Who's shutting it down? Not God. Its greatest pleasure is to pour all of this into your life. All of it. But we have to receive it. We have to believe it and then receive it. And we're going to see as we move in next week into that. She talks about this, and I love this visual. I'm very visual. She talks about this fountain within you. It's the God fountain. And there's this fountain head, the water source that never, ever ends. And there's a stream coming directly into you. And inside of you is this fountain of God, of all good, just flowing. But you and I, the visual I had is you and I squeezed the hose shut. And the fountain gets littler and littler. We shut it with this, with what we think and what we say. And what she's saying is open up. Release all those things. Allness is yours and mine. To have it all. A couple daily practices that come out of here. She uses the word Christ here. You can use whatever word works for you. I am the Christ. I use my completed soul is the way. She said use these while you're out during the day and you're finding yourself getting a little wigged out or anxious or whatever. Just go to this. Breathe in and just use these words. She said there's power in these words. It's called pluriloquism. Words that have been used over centuries create an energy force around those words. And we can use those. But use the word that works for you. Don't use Christ if that's an issue. Because it sets up all kinds of dissonance in your own mind and your feeling. Use the word that works. We have many words here. Your true self. Hindus use Atman. Lao Tzu in China uses the way or the Tao. Use whatever word. It could be life force. Whatever word works for you, but have a go-to during the day that you go to and get you back to that fountain. You can call it a God fountain if you like. And the words don't matter. The words are signposts to the feeling. And we've got to do the experience. We have to do the doing of the words to be able to have it make change. Number 2, this is the one I love. I and the allness are one. That works for me better than the Father and I are one. I've got some father issues, I guess. Or mother issues, father, mother, God, or whatever it might be. But for me, allness is allness. I get that. And I and the allness are one is a very powerful words that I use during the day. And the other one that I use, and I've talked about this before, I breathe in, God is, and I breathe out, I am. And I want to feel the allness and feel that connection in that fountain of God within you. And if you can do that this week, all this other stuff is words. Get to the being of this fountain. And let that be the expression of light as you move through the thoughts and the feelings and the actions that you take during this week. Okay? Let's go to stillness, please. As Kate comes forward, I just take a couple of cleansing breaths. I like to exhale and just hold it for a minute. Count of 6 is great. Get the whirly birds out of your mind. And as you exhale, allow yourself to breathe in Spirit. Visualize this incredible fountain with whatever pipe you have right now, double the size of the pipe. Maybe triple it. Don't limit it. Don't lack. Let the biggest fountain you can imagine of the divine flow through the center of you. It's the allness of the divine. It's life at the fullness. It's unconditional love. You are loved by the creator of the universe. It doesn't get any better than that. And the wisdom and intelligence that never ever makes a mistake is flowing through you if you say yes and let it happen. And with that comes spiritual power, which is the power of the universe. There is only one power. Let it come through. Dwell in it, bask in it, commune in it, abide in it. Hold that feeling, hold that vision, and walk into this next week with the fountain of God just as big as bright as it can possibly be. And so it is.